Greg Batsey. I'm the borough manager. Appreciate everybody coming out tonight for this informative discussion about possible regional policing in Swissvale, the Swissvale area. Councilwoman Welby Scales, she'll be acting basically as our MC tonight. So she'll be introducing the speakers and she'll be entertaining questions from everyone. Deanne is the Vice President of Swissvale Borough Council. She's also the chairperson of our police committee and the chairperson of our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. So she'll give us a little brief overview of why we're here and then introduce our speakers. We have 3 excellent speakers tonight. And if you have questions, please hold them for the end of each segment, and then we'll have a question period at the end also. Ms. Scales?
All right. I want to first thank you guys for coming out. It's freezing cold. So thank you so much. That means all of my posts and flyers and everything bugged you enough to come out tonight. Thank you. For those of you who are watching virtually, thank you so much for tuning in. We're having this discussion today because the topic of police regionalization keeps coming up. It keeps coming up. It keeps coming up every time I turn around police regionalization. And although council and our officials here, we're aware of what regionalization is, the question then popped in my mind, do our public know what regionalization is? Do they know, why this topic even keeps coming up? Do they understand why the topic is coming up? Do they have any insight in terms of what are the pitfalls, what are the positives associated with it? So I, of course, came up with the bright idea, Greg, let's have a public discussion. We have a public discussion so that we can discuss these things. I'm not a fan of coming before residents and just saying this is what we're doing, take it. No. I want it to be very transparent, have an open discussion so that we can get your questions. I mean, the difficult questions, the easy questions, the good questions, whatever questions, because this is a discussion. I want to be very clear. There's been no formal agreement to engage in any sort of police regionalization services with Swissvale. That is not the case. This is purely a discussion topic because it keeps coming up. And so I want to have that discussion with all of you today. Greg already introduced who I am. And if anybody wants to follow with me after this, my contact information is listed on our borough website. Alrighty, so what we have today is we're going to have individuals who can discuss what shared services are, regionalization, police regionalization is, and why that's even a topic of discussion today. So one of our speakers today is Ms. Amanda Settlemyer. She is the Executive Director for Turtle Creek Valley Council of Governments. Prior to her appointment as the Executive Director in June of 2008, Amanda was Special Projects Coordinator for State Senator Sean Logan, and prior to that, the Grants and Communications Coordinator for the municipality of Monroeville. She began her career as the Assistant Community Development Coordinator at the Turtle Creek Valley Council of Governments. Amanda currently serves as chairperson for the Board of Directors at the Convention Visitors Bureau of Greater Monroeville and is also a member of the Executive Board of the Tri-Cog Land Bank. I want to invite Amanda up here to speak to you all today.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me, and especially to talk about my favorite subject, which is shared services. You want to flip the slide? So councils of government, is anybody here familiar with what a council of governments is? Oh, that's great. So we're an organization that's voluntary. Communities join the club based on a desire to want to participate with their neighbors. We were formed back in 1971, originally with 11 members, and it was around the Model Cities program at the time. But since then, we've grown to 20 municipalities, and we're like the Parkway East from Wilkinsburg all the way out to Monroe, going from North Versailles on our south end. So there are 7 councils of governments in Allegheny County, and we're sort of geographic to the county for the most part. And that's, I mean, it sort of makes sense, especially when you're sharing equipment and things like that. To have adjoining borders with your neighbors sort of makes sense for a clock boundary. So we thought about our mission, and what we really want to do is facilitate collaboration and programs that strengthen the connections between our members and the region. And we really want to work hard to be a model of good government for all of our residents. So some of the things that we do in terms of shared services, we have a very robust utility billing program. And by coming together, instead of every community hiring somebody internally to do their billing, we have someone that's been there for over 30 years. And has been there now, I think, for 6 years. We're able to come together and do that jointly. And by doing so, we're able to negotiate with cloud-based software providers and get a little lower cost on that software, and enabling people to have access to software that helps to keep them current. And that's, in terms of utility billing, that's our main goal. We don't want to see people become delinquent, so we want to make it as easy to pay as humanly possible, and be able to be there to answer questions and just provide good service. I'll bring out my mom voice. That's when you bring out my mom voice. We also do accounts payable for some of our towns that have limited staff capacity. We have a sewer maintenance program where we purchased a very expensive piece of equipment. It was about $380,000. Not real sexy. It goes and it cleans out catch basins and sewers, but things that are mandated by the federal and state government. And keeps water from backing up into your basement. This is why these things are important. So if we all come together, buy that piece of equipment and share it, that makes a whole lot of sense, right? And then one of the important things, one of my favorite things too, is representation in different discussions regionally. There are a couple of examples on the screen. We were able to participate in a conversation around lead mitigation and demolition, and some other topics that come up. It's really important for our region to have a voice at that table. And I think it makes a big impact. Sometimes the most expensive solution may do more harm than good in our communities. And so we just want to be very mindful that I think public policy is one of the hardest things, because oftentimes there are unintended consequences. And so especially for our more challenged communities, it's important that they have representation at these meetings. So another thing I'm really excited about, we meet with our police chiefs regularly. And one of the things that's come out of the police chief meetings is a regional training program. And you can see some pictures of that. So it's really important for our towns, a lot of whom have part-time police that maybe switch towns or whatever. They have to know how to communicate with one another when they're responding to mutual aid. And this training program helps them do that. We come together as a region and we provide this training at very low cost. It's $25 per officer. And that helps us cover the costs of the supplies that we need. So it's really good. We do that twice a year. We also do police testing. We just did a police test, and I will tell you, we had three applicants for our police test, and there were 4 communities testing. So what does that, that's not the first time either. We've had several tests where we are having a really difficult time finding applicants, and we're not the only ones. I think this is much wider than the Turtle Creek Valley Cloud towns, but it is certainly an issue that many of our towns are trying to find solutions around. Some other things that the Turtle Creek Valley Cog does, we do a lot of grant management, community development block grants that run through HUD, or filtered through Allegheny County and then come out to our towns. We manage all of that from the very beginning to the very end and make sure that we're in compliance with all those fund regulations from the county and the federal government. We participate in an intercog purchasing alliance. So that's all your commodities, from rock salt to lime painting, if you have a community pool chemicals, whatever the case may be. This is truly a competitive bid process, unlike CoStarz, which is not necessarily a competitive process. So there's that. We have our managers meetings. Greg is a frequent, always participates in our managers meetings. It's so valuable, especially for some of our newer managers too. There's always a lot of learning that goes on, but Greg's a wealth of information. We're very happy to have him.
I paid her.
One of the things that came out of our managers meeting though was cable franchising renewal, where we were able to work together on a group contract to save a little bit of money. We have a UCC and Property Maintenance Appeals Board. So by law, towns have to have a way for people to appeal any kind of code violation. And we do that regionally, especially for UCC, the Uniform Construction Code. The board that staffs that has to have certain criteria. So it has to be an engineer, an architect. Sometimes it's hard to fill all those positions. So we've come together regionally to do that. And that's actually been very helpful, I think. But our, what's close and dear to my heart is all of our effort around blight mitigation. So we have a code enforcement program that we have, really trying to get more strategic around code enforcement. And Swissvale has a wonderful code enforcement program, and Greg's always helping me try to think things through. And then, of course, the Turtle Creek Valley COG was a co-founder of the Tripod Land Bank. Is anybody here familiar with the land bank? Okay, so now I actually sit on that board, and the land bank's doing very well and is growing, but it took a couple of years, and people, it's hard to be patient and to understand that legal process that's involved with properties. But it was really important at the outset of the land bank to really think through the acquisition and disposition of properties policies. And they've done that. They've done an excellent job, and now they're scaling up. So that's really exciting. And then we are developing, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, if I would have been a software developer, I would have said, no, there's no way. But here we are developing software. It is open source civic software around code enforcement workflow. And it's really to help those maybe less experienced code enforcement officers walk through the legal process of code enforcement so that they can be organized and have some success in court, especially when you start thinking about all of these outside investors that are coming into our communities and buying up properties. We really need to be strategic and create some tools to help manage that and help mitigate it a little bit. So why do shared services fail? That's such a good question. So we operated a public works department in a couple of our communities for 28 years. It was, in my mind, not a failure. We ran it for 28 years. It was underfunded, understaffed. It was not a lot of fun. And it came to an end. But sometimes, the COG's goal should always be in line with its communities. And I think it was in everybody's interest for that department to dissolve. Because I think that sometimes when we think about shared services, there's this false narrative around saving money, and that's not always true. In fact, if you want a better service, sometimes you have to invest a little bit more money. People don't want to hear that, but that's really the truth. When you're talking about shared services, having a properly certified professional manager manage that program, you can't do without that. If you try to do without that, it's probably not going to go well. It's just what I've learned over the years. Quality technology is a must, and don't rely on grant dollars. Unless you have some money tree somewhere where you can expect that money to come in, don't create a program that's contingent on grant funding that may or may not come. But maybe the most important, and if you didn't hear anything else I said today, in my humble opinion, the reason why collaborations succeed or fail rests on the political will to do them, right? That's political will in terms of support and investment in dollars. So you have to have those things or it's probably not going to work out real well. And I think, keep in mind that communities are complex and regional issues require thoughtful collaboration, partnerships, and resources. There's not many communities I know anymore that can do it by themselves. So we have to come together and think strategically, think critically, work together, put our brain trust together, and get something better than we had before. It might not save you money, but it's probably going to be better than what you had, which is the goal. And that's all I have.
Anybody have any questions for Amanda?
Just if any of the other communities in the COG have undergone any police regionalization and if you've assisted with that.
I have been involved in regional police conversations, none that went beyond the planning stage for whatever reason. Usually, you know, it's trying to work out the formula of who's paying what and, you know, what you're going to get for that. And is somebody going to be patrolling my street and how often, those kinds of questions.
How was the Turtle Creek Valley COG funded?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking that. So we do have dues. Each of our 20-member municipalities pays a flat rate. We're the only COG that does dues this way. My board has insisted that they be flat so that it's not based on property value or size or anything else. We treat every single member the same, but that's only a small portion of our budget. Most of it comes through fee for service. And again, if you want a quality service, you have to pay for it. I don't know why in public service in particular, people in general don't like to pay people, you know, but people need to make money. They need to pay their bills. And if you want a quality, you have to pay people what they're worth, right? You know, and otherwise you're going to have turnover and maybe not as good of a service as you were hoping. Well, thank you. Oh,
Sorry, just related to that, have you, like, you mentioned the thing about like having a sort of professional manager involved in whatever it is really important to success. And so is there such a thing either at Turtle Creek Valley COG or in any other COG as like a professional manager that oversees any regionalized departments that you're aware of, or is there like a fee for service that any COG has done related to that?
yeah. So there are no COGs in Allegheny County that manage a regional police department. I would not be surprised if there was a COG out there. So COGs are national, you know, they're big and small all over the country. There are some really successful programs around code enforcement though.
I understand that there's regionalized police departments in the North Hills. Do you know anything about them or why are they successful? I mean, I think that's the question I have, you know, what makes it work there and struggle elsewhere?
So I can't talk factually about it. My guess is that they are well funded. I have spoken with their chief and he's amazing. You know, so I think all of that matters.
We have an amazing chief too, so
You do.
I didn't Excuse me. I think what we have to address here, and I know a lot of people, when I was a teenager back in the 80s and we lost our local garbage collection. And believe it or not, when we lost the high school and we lost that name on the garbage truck, that was a big deal. So we brought it back. I think one of the things is a lot of people, they see that police car, especially the elderly, they see that borough name. That means a lot to them. That's branding. So maybe people don't want to give that up. Maybe that's one of the issues.
I think branding, I think branding has been an issue, but I mean, some of the police studies that I've seen are kind of interesting. They sort of look beyond the municipal borders and create, you know, and then break things into zones. And really, you know, that's how a regional department seems to work, is more in zones. But that branding, people have to be invested in that new regional brand.
Yeah.
That's not impossible. That's very doable. Especially if you're getting a better value, you're getting a better quality service.
One
maybe somebody else will speak to this later on, but I feel like I would benefit from a police regionalization 101. Like, what are the basics? Because you just talked about possibly breaking down zones between boroughs, and I feel like I don't know, I would benefit from a like, what is this? I don't feel like I heard that yet.
No, and I'm not the person to
Okay.
give that. I could possibly help identify some resources for a future meeting if that's something that you wanted to do. But I'm definitely not the person to do that.
Okay, so I have that.
I think this is just the basic introduction of the concept. And if council wishes to move further with it, we'll get into more of those things like you're talking about.
Well, I guess actually I'm asking for an introduction of the concept. Like I'm asking for like a 101, like what?
Well, this is like a macro view, and I think what you're asking is more of a micro view. This is, there's some other presenters who I think may answer some of your questions.
Okay, great.
And, if not, then we can try to answer them individually.
Northern Regional, isn't that Marshall, Shadeland, Richland's Pine? Why can't we have some of those officers and their chiefs show up and say, if there's anybody that remembers, this is how we did it? A testimonial would be great. That'd really be, I think maybe that's what you're asking.
I'd be happy to help put that together if that's something that the community wants to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Amanda. So we have with us also Kelly. She is with Connect. You guys have heard us talk about Connect and, speak up, okay. You guys have heard us mention Connect and the LEAD program a lot. Sean Alfonso Wells, she's our representative for Connect. So Kelly is here today. She is the lead community engagement manager for Connect at the University of Pittsburgh. LEAD is known as Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, and it is a national model for pre-arrest diversion that Connect is piloting in several municipalities in Allegheny County, including Swissvale. Kelly came to Connect from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, where she worked as a grant coordinator. She served 2 terms as mayor in Turtle Creek Borough and is a well-known community advocate for people with substance use disorders and their families. Kelly also sits on the Alpha Sign Advisory Committee, the Pittsburgh Recovery Walk Steering Committee. She has a BA in political science from the University of Pittsburgh and an MA in criminology from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Kelly will be speaking about her organization, the LEAD program, and cooperation and shared services.
Thank you for inviting me tonight to speak with you all. Very excited to talk about regionalization, community led program development, facilitating communities to work together on kind of cross-boundary issues, policy issues in our community. So a little bit about what Connect is. Some of you might be familiar with it. As stated, Sean is very active in our member organization. So what we do is we are the Congress of Neighboring Communities. And so we bring together the city of Pittsburgh and surrounding communities to talk about cross-boundary policy issues. We focus on public health and safety projects. We focused on climate action, infrastructure improvement, economic development improvements, things like that. So what the idea of this organization, and it's a member organization, so municipalities can use to become members of our organizations, and we work with them. If you want, you can go to the next one. And what's different about Connect is the members are the municipalities, not individuals. So each member municipalities designates 1 to 3 elected or appointed officials to be representatives of their municipality at Connect. And so what they do is they will bring to us some issues that they're having in their community And we bring them to working group meetings, to executive committee meetings, different facilitated meetings that we have throughout the weeks, months, years, and say, this community is dealing with this issue, so is this community, so is this community. How can we bring them together and work on this issue together and share services, share connections, share networks? So maybe one municipality has resources, can provide a program for their community, but the two communities that neighbor them can't. How can that community help those other two communities be able to provide services to all three communities? So those are the kind of things we talk about. Those are the kind of things we work on. One of those things that came out of some of these discussions where we had our member communities come to a meeting and said, we are really struggling with police, not having enough police in our communities. They're overwhelmed in general because we don't have enough police to, to help our community to do the things they need to do every day, but we're also being overloaded by the opioid epidemic. Police are being asked to do things that are outside of what they would normally have to deal with during their everyday job. Dealing with people with substance use disorders, people with mental health issues, people with unmet behavioral health needs due to poverty and different things kind of stemming from the opioid epidemic, but also going further than that. But this is kind of how the discussion started. So when they came to us, we looked for different kind of types of programs that address this in communities. Law enforcement assisted diversion was one of those programs. And we went back to our member municipalities and said, is this something that you think your communities would be interested in? And do you think this could work? You'd have to work together. You'd have to work with your neighboring communities. You'd have to share resources. You'd have to come together and, come to meetings weekly and do it. And they said, yes, we want to really be able to do this. So what it is, it's for communities, and it reduces recidivism, crime, and negative police interactions. It improves public health and safety, improves quality of life for community members with unmet needs, and it's customizable to community needs. So for law enforcement officers, it's a great resource and a tool for better serving their communities. It reduces burnout and increases positive reactions with the community, and it also mitigates the need for high-level interventions. And for the county, what we're doing is building relationships among county, municipal, and community stakeholders, and we're improving cross-boundary collaboration among police, EMS, and health services, and we're also empowering communities to work on this together to solve a problem. So how this started was back in 2016. We brought together 20 different communities for quarterly meetings at our public health and safety working groups. It started out from those meetings. Then as the years progressed, we did pre-planning projects stages and a research to action report, which consisted of 2 staff members for a 6-month period who went out to the communities and talked to folks just like you. Asked them about what they thought about a LEAD program, what they saw as things happening in their community concerning public health and safety issues, what they thought, do they think that their police were overwhelmed? Do they think that they were the appropriate people to deal with people who had unmet behavioral health needs? What were their feelings around the criminal legal system and people coming into contact with police because of these unmet needs? So we released that report, and from that report, we developed subcommittees, and that was initiated by this working group. And we actually had over 100 stakeholders attend this meeting with 2 full-time staff, which is myself and our program director. And then as you can see, we had subcommittees and cohorts. We decided to run the program out of cohorts. So right now we are doing law enforcement assisted diversion in the North cohort, which is Millville, Etna, and Shaler. The 3 communities work together to provide this program to their residents. The police chiefs come together. We've had weekly meetings with them. They're involved in doing the guidelines and giving us referrals for people to be in the program. And I'm sure Chief will talk about this when he comes up, but we have just started in the East cohort now, which consists of Swissvale, Forest Hills, Churchill, Wilkins, Chalfont, and Braddock Hills. So those communities are working together to provide this service for their communities. And out of this, we developed a policy coordinating group. And so at the top of this program, we actually have 25 county and local stakeholders that come to a monthly meeting to talk about this program. And the stakeholders in those meetings are the county executive, the mayor of Pittsburgh, the district attorney's office, public defender's office. We have probation and parole. We have the court systems represented. We have advocacy groups represented. We have activist groups represented. And we have service providers represented, all coming together once a month to talk about how best to implement this program. We also have community leadership teams where we go out in the communities, and you'll be seeing me a lot more probably in the next couple of months, because I will be reaching out to people here talking about community leadership teams that can come and be a part of this program to make sure that the program is reaching the people that we really need to reach. And so, again, this is just the timeline and how long it kind of took us to get to the point that we're at right now with the launch. And then we're planning to expand in other communities. And why this is important in terms of shared services. We took a lot of time reaching out to each individual community and bringing them together and talking to them about how they felt about these issues in their communities, how they felt about being able to work with their neighbors, what they thought they could do in terms of providing a program to residents if they had this, this, and this. And a lot of times the answer was, we need a partner. We need somebody else to be able to work with. If their neighbors were interested, people were said, well, then yeah, then we could have that extra staff, we can have that extra support. We might get more funding than we could have before. If this would not have happened without communities coming together and doing a shared service kind of program. There might be some municipalities in the over 130 some we have in Allegheny County that may have been able to provide a program like this on their own. They may have had staff, they may have had funding, they may have been able to do it, but more than likely, most of the communities here in Allegheny County can't provide services like this without coming together and working together on something like this. So again, like Amanda said, shared services and regionalization and people coming together to provide services for their residents, I think is very important. It was something that was important to me when I was mayor. We certainly talked a lot about trying to share different services. And I know somebody asked about like the branding area. People hold their communities so close, right? I hold my community close. I grew up in Turtle Creek. I served Turtle Creek for 8 years. I certainly wouldn't want to feel like we were losing our sense of community because we were, banding together with other communities or creating a new community that we call something else. So I think that a lot of times those kind of feelings come in, but I think when we all sit down and really talk about what we want to provide for our communities and what we're able to do, it's better that we do it together. So, and that's really what it comes down to. I don't think I have another slide after this, do I? Yeah, that's it. So anybody have any questions on the program or what Connect does or, yeah.
Can you describe an example of like someone going through this program and trying to get this stuff?
Oh, sure. So what happens is when we started the program, right now we just did it by referrals. So it is a pre-arrest diversion program. So technically what has to happen is somebody comes in contact with a police officer and that police officer, say it's for shoplifting, petty theft, possession. We have a number of different crimes that we have listed that could be eligible for somebody to be referred to lead. If the police officer thinks that person is a good fit for lead, they will call a case manager. The case manager will come out and work with that person long-term and not be cited for that offense. They will not be arrested. So, and there is also no coercion in this program. It's very harm reduction based. It's voluntary. They do not have to do it. They don't have to go to treatment. They don't have to follow a certain number of steps to be able to stay in the program. All they have to do is sign a release form. And then that person is connected to that case manager long-term. Even if they're rearrested, even if they come into some other problems, they still have that connection with that case manager. So that's like the real sort of key piece of the program. It doesn't mean it's a get out of jail free card. Doesn't mean they can't be arrested for something else. But they will still have access to that case manager long-term. So, yeah.
So how is this program relative to police regionalization?
Well, that's good. And I think probably Chief could probably talk about this a little bit more, but it really is about, we brought multiple police departments together to provide a program. So I think it sort of speaks to how the different departments can come together to provide something, and how, and honestly, in most of the discussions, it's the police departments are struggling. They don't have a lot of staff. I know a couple of our police chiefs for our Friday meetings in the north, one police chief never can attend, hasn't been able to attend probably the last couple of months because he's the only one that's on duty and he can't make the meeting. So I think he appreciates the fact that he has the other two chiefs that can come in and help with the program and make sure it's being provided in a way that he might not be able to monitor that day. So in that sort of way, I think it shows that the coming together of these communities to provide that service would be the same if you brought those three police departments together to work together to provide policing for those three communities. So for me, coming to talk about this program, I thought it was a good example of that, because it really is, none of them are like in competition with each other to try and say, well, I have more people that I need in here. Everybody is working together, and I'm sure Chief will talk about that too, about the East cohort, because it really is, they want the best for their communities, and they know right now they're struggling. So I think this program is a good example about how they can come together to provide that, and how if in the future there are talks about police departments merging or regionalizing or doing those kind of things, I think that it can work, and they can be able to provide very effective services for their communities.
I'm just curious about the resources and are they hired from the community, or like how is the?
They are, so we went through an RFP process with the Department of Human Services, the County Department of Human Services. And so they were chosen through that process, and they are contracted through DHS. So they're called Passages to Recovery. They used to be the program for female offenders. They've changed now to Passages to Recovery. And they actually specifically hired staff for just this lead program. It wasn't something they've done before. So it's been really great to work with them, because we've been able to kind of be a part of creating this entire program really from the ground up. Who we want as case managers, what we're looking for, what kind of services we want to provide. So that's how we're doing it. Yeah.
So the LEAD program, to help kind of like divert folks with like lower level crimes
Yes.
towards like care,
Yes.
is distinct from the idea of merging police departments. These are like two separate.
There are two, yes, but it's just an example of this program. It's kind of like what Connect does. We do community-driven programs that combine services. So they are providing a shared service by various municipalities working on an issue to provide one sort of service together. So sort of in a way, it is kind of like what you're talking about in terms of regionalization. Now at Connect, we talk a lot about regionalization. We talk a lot about shared services. We talk a lot about merging. I also do, we have a future of fire committee where we're talking about regionalization of volunteer fire departments. So there's a lot of talk around, we don't have enough volunteers, or we don't have enough, people to run our fire departments, or we have too much equipment here, but this other fire department doesn't. So it's all these different things that we talk about. But I think the programs that we do really show how it can work. Like, we have communities coming together to provide a service and a program. So if you think about it, I would think that if you regionalize your police department or you regionalize your fire department, and like Amanda says, it simply goes to zones or it goes to something different, it shows that these communities can work together to provide those services. So I think it's just, I think what happens, and we've talked to the community a lot about these things, it's sort of the fear of losing what you have, feeling like you're not going to have a say in it. And we have these discussions all the time, like making sure that communities have representation. We make sure communities have representation in this program. That's why we have a community leadership team. So we have people from all those communities that can come together and talk about how the program is working. how it's affecting their community. So we do try really hard to make sure that everyone is represented and doesn't lose their identity. But I think that that answers your question, I'm not sure. Because I'm not an expert on regionalization either.
Sure.
So simply just with what our organization does in terms of shared services and projects that we work on. So.
I promise you, this will be my last question.
Yeah, that's okay.
So those difficult conversations about losing identity and not having a say, is there a particular organization or just an individual within Connect that help those discussions? Because
yeah, we can do those. We
love-
can facilitate that. Yeah, absolutely. And we've done that for a number of communities and different kinds of services that either they're looking at, even if they just want to talk about regionalizing police departments. I was involved in the talks with North Braddock and Rankin and East Pittsburgh, I think, which was.
It was Rankin, Whitaker originally, East Pittsburgh, Braddock and North Braddock, those 5 communities. And I think they're talking again now.
They are. They just had another meeting where a couple of people I work with at the university are involved in those discussions as well. And I went and they asked me to present on this and talk about how these things can kind of work. So we can certainly facilitate for any community that wants to do that. We can do that. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Whoever wants to go.
No. So I was just going to comment on the chief's discussion. So I'm Michelle Nakaradi-Chakis, and I'm on Allegheny County Council. And I've been attending the police regionalization meetings that have been going on since last August. It's the 4 municipalities now, so Braddock, North Braddock, Rankin, and East Pittsburgh. And one of the things so they've had a lot of the concerns early on and had a lot of working meetings amongst all the municipalities to get to where they are today, which is that now they've engaged a facilitator at the state, at the Department of Community Economic Development, DCED, who has funding and to bring to these efforts to help support the transition. So now there's a police chief who's coming in and is acting as a facilitator and having interviews with each of the departments to look at the assets that they have within each department and then who brings what to the table, essentially. All of those municipalities have now gone at the council meeting and have entered into agreements and publicly stated that they are willing to move forward in this effort and recognize the value that it brings to their communities. So now it looks like it will really happen. And so that's a good thing. And there is a lot of communication and a lot of the meetings happen. But it has to have all the municipalities at the table in order for it to work.
Yeah, and if I can just further what Michelle said, to further your question, Seth, that would be the next step. If we identify communities, communities that we would be looking to work with and merge with, bringing DCD in the picture would be the next step, because we've talked to them and they will not get involved in a meeting like this, like a startup meeting, without a commitment from 2 or more municipalities. So until we identify someone that we were looking to work with, that's when the DCD would get involved. As Michelle said, there is funding involved for studies, and they would look, do a thorough in-depth analysis as to whether a merger or shared service between those municipalities for policing would actually work.
From your first cohort, that was like the Sharpsburg, Etna.
Yeah, Etna, Millville, and Shaler.
Do you have like report or anything on like how that's going or like?
Not yet,
data
we're working on that.
information?
Yeah, we just started just in September of last year. So we're working with Department of Human Services to provide those reports, because what's interesting about this program is there's not been this program hasn't been launched in an area like ours with 130 some municipalities. It started in Seattle, so it's mostly in larger cities. And we're having a little bit of a difficult time about how to measure some of the results because of the way our county is. So DHS actually has to figure out a different way to collect the data. So we're doing that currently. So,
And if I can ask a related question,
Yeah.
so I believe, and I think this was before your program started, I think they also looked into regionalization and it didn't go anywhere. I
in
believe
those communities.
some of those communities, I think Sharpsburg voted affirmative. but
Yeah, I
then
think they
another
did.
one
Yeah, they-
didn't, or something like,
Yeah,
I don't know
I-
if you saw any like overlap in the two issues and, you know, did they come to the table to lead because they failed in that, or did they, was there any
No, they-
relationship?
Yes, they have a very close relationship, those three communities. Sharpsburg and Aspinwall also wanted to be included. But Etna, Millvale, and Shaler, because their relationship is so close and they work so closely together and do pretty much everything together, they wanted it just to say the three of them to start. And then possibly add Sharpsburg and Aspinwall after they started. So yes, they pretty much do everything together.
Is your program offered to communities who aren't regionalizing police?
Oh, yes. So what we started in pretty much connect member municipalities. So that's kind of why we're in Etna, Millvale, and Shaler, why we're coming out here to Swissvale, Churchill. All the communities that we have, I think with the exception of one maybe, are connect member communities. But our plan is to expand it to anybody in Allegheny County that wants to be able to have this. So we're looking to expand to possibly McKees Rocks next. We're in talks with them. I've also had meetings with Braddock, Rankin. Like I said, I presented at the regionalization meeting with those communities. They're very interested. So the plan is to expand.
And they don't
Once-
have to be in the process of regionalization,
No.
they're just any.
No, they just have to be willing to work with their neighboring communities. Okay, thank you, everybody. And I'll be here after if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Okay, I'm going to call up our Chief Watson. Chief Watson currently serves as the Chief of Police for the Borough of Swissvale. He has served in this position for the past 5 years. Prior to that, he served for 5 years as the Assistant Chief and has been a member of the Swissvale Police Department for over 24 years, having started as a part-time patrolman and working his way through the ranks to the position of chief. Chief Watson has been heavily involved in regional training programs for police departments and has taken a lead in working with the lead program that Ms. Kelly discussed. Chief Watson will be talking about the current challenges of policing, lack of manpower, and possible solution to these issues.
Good evening, everybody. I think that was a good introduction to who I am. So the Swissvale Police Department currently, as it stands, we have the chief of police, which is me right now. We have a detective sergeant. We have 4 patrol sergeants, 2 canine officers, being the dogs themselves, and a narcotics detective, 8 full-time officers, and 3 part-time officers. Now, the 3 part-time officers currently work 7 to 8 shifts a week, even though we have budgeted for about 20 shifts a week for part-time officers. And that gets to the problem that we're having with staffing all across this county, is the lack of individuals who want to serve in public safety, not just police, fire, EMS, dispatching. We're all suffering through the same difficulty staffing those positions. And it's becoming a bigger challenge. So when I was a part-time officer 24 years ago, we had 15 to 20 part-time officers. We had a stack of applications 100 deep. And that's just the way it was. There was more people applying for the job than there were jobs. And over the past 10 years, we've seen our department go from 25 officers, which was typically 15 full-time and 10 part-time, down to where we are with what I talked about in the first slide. And there's a lot of articles that show, CNN's talked about it, MSNBC, any news source will show you that nationwide, there's a lack of people who want to be police officers today. And that's what's driving this issue. So the next thing, we talked about consolidation. There's basically two ways to consolidate. There's either what's called a contracted police service. An example of that would be Ohio Township. They currently serve, I believe, like 5 other municipalities beside their own. It's through a contracted service. The communities pay Ohio Township a set amount of money. There's a contract, and they provide police service to that community. The second type is a merged department, a consolidated police department. And they talked about Northern Regional. That's the best example in Allegheny County. Originally, it was Pine Marshall and Bradford Woods, and then they merged with Richland Township to form Northern Regional, which is what they have today. And they have a board which has members from all the communities' councils that oversee the police department based on a formula they came up with for the representation based on population, number of calls, how much they contribute to the agency. So those are the two ways that you can have a consolidated police service. Now, in Pennsylvania, under Section 5, Article 9 of the Constitution, and also under Act 180, there's the legal basis for consolidated police service or consolidated service in general. So, I mean, it's well established that this is able to happen under the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania law. So we talked about advantages of police consolidation, improvement in the uniformity and consistency of police enforcement. So if you have an all part-time police department, you know, those officers are very dedicated to their job. But it's hard because a lot of them work multiple jobs. I mean, I know that at times there were officers working 3 and 4 part-time jobs to survive because they're paid less money. So their commitment is there, but you know, how can you police consistently when you're moving around from department to department, as opposed to a full-time officer who's dedicated and at that agency all the time and knows the community. And that's one of the things people want. They want to know their police officers. They want to see them all the time. And when you have an all full-time department, which is one of the things you should always strive to have, you know the community members. You have that interaction on a consistent basis. So it also, you know, there's another items about coordination of law enforcement services, distribution and deployment of police personnel. We talked about when you cover multiple communities, you would have zones for the officer to patrol, so everybody's not in one community. So that police presence is spread out through however many number of communities you are out policing. Training is another big issue. When you are short personnel, it is very difficult to train your officers because now you have to use overtime to backfill your shifts to have the proper number of people policing your community. And if you have more personnel, you can obviously attend more training. And I know that's a big issue for policing because lack of training leads to all the, the incidents that we see on the news. You know, everybody has to know that a better trained officer is going to handle those critical incidents in a more professional way and not end up on the news with what happens. So I'm a big proponent of training. I work with the COG very heavily with that active threat response. And that has to do typically with when we see school shootings. And we all know in Uvalde, that was handled in a way that nobody was happy with. So we don't want that to happen here. So we are very big on training our officers how to respond to those types of incidents. Of course, management and supervision is important. That's one of the reasons we have 4 patrol supervisors. So we have professional managers who are trained. They go to a class called Closet. It teaches them how to be a supervisor. All of our supervisors attend that training. But it's hard to do if you don't have the proper number of personnel and don't have the ability to sell. And officers like to have the pathway to career enhancement. They want to know that they can get promoted, that they can do other things like be a detective, if they're stuck as a patrol officer for 25 years, it's the same job over. So the possibility of career enhancement adds to their dedication to the job and how they perform. But the point of this is in 2019, a PERF, which is a Police Executive Research Forum, did a study and just talked about the number of police officers who are going to retire in the next 3 to 5 years. And what you're seeing in the city of Pittsburgh is they have a large number of officers who can retire, and they don't have the people to replace them. So this is coming true right now in this region. So it's just something to consider with this possibility of regional policing, that you would be able to hire hopefully more full-time personnel and not have the part-time that is really going away. Again, this talks about increased personnel opportunities. You know, officers want to grow in their job. They want to receive training. They want to have opportunity to do different things. They want to grow in their profession. So we work hard to do that here with what we have. But I feel like if the council and the community believes that regionalization is something they would be interested in, and we can find somebody to work with, by improving our department, these things would be available, and I believe it makes for a better police department. This just goes into more detail. Big city agencies, because they have so many people, offer a lot more training opportunities. And again, it gives the officers a better background. And we strive to do that here, but in a small community, it's difficult to do. And that's where having the COG and having Connect, being able to bring those programs here, we wouldn't be able to do by ourselves. So talking about the active threat response, we have trainers from, I think, 8 communities, and we couldn't do it just by ourselves. They couldn't do it by themselves. We're talking communities like Monroeville and Penn Hills, so who have 50 police officers. So regionalization happens on a level now. If we get a critical call, we get officers from Edgewood and Wilkinsburg and Braddock Hills to respond to help us, just like we do with them. Mutual aid is so important because none of us have enough people to do it on our own. Okay. So perceived negative factors, because those are there and they're real concerns. Loss of local control, lack of enforcement, and loss of citizen contact. And I would argue, that the loss of local control, if you regionalize under the 2 models that we showed you, unless you're contracting with another agency, you still have a say. You have a contract that spells out the obligations of the police department who's providing the service. If you're the police department providing that service, you have a contract that explains what you're expected to do. If you have a regional department that's a merger, you have members of your elected council sitting on a board overseeing that agency. So I know that's a big issue, but it's just learning that you still have a say in your police department. It's still your police department. Yep. Of course, we're having this meeting because your opinion matters. Because council's made it abundantly clear that they want to know how the public feels about this. And it's hard to lose your identity because people who are living in Swissvale are proud of where they live. So we want to know what you think about this. That's why we're here. And we hope that this answers some of your questions and you understand that we see advantages to this as well. So without communities working together, like, our trash department provides services to other communities. That intergovernmental cooperation exists to benefit everybody involved. Obviously, geographical conditions are a part. You want to be adjacent to whoever you're working with. That's just you don't want to drive through other communities to provide us services. That's not always practical. And the demographic characteristics, people want, the same economics, towards what they're doing, so people can afford that police department. These are some other things. Of course, the attitude of the police officers, you need buy-in by them as well if you're going to do this. They have to believe this benefits them professionally. And, community support and insurance is an issue sometimes as well. I think this goes through things we've covered already. In conclusion, we believe there's many benefits. There's also a lot of hurdles. The local control is a big issue we need to get through. Obviously, we have pride, in this community. But the reality is the manpower or lack thereof is going to drive a lot of this in public safety, and it's not going away. I look at the classes in the police academy. They used to be 50 every 3 to 4 months. Now it's 15 every 6 months. So this is a real concern for everybody nationwide. So, any questions? Yes.
Was it ever discussed that Swissvale be a part of the regionalization discussion with Rankin and the other boroughs? Because it seems like as far as adjacent communities go, that covers a lot of them.
No, we were never part of that.
Why, why not?
We were never invited, as far as I know. Yes.
I don't think there wasn't any exclusionary.
No.
I think it just goes, that regionalization discussion is historic. It was going back maybe 3 or 4 years, even longer perhaps.
I think it was 5 years. They had
a
a plan in place. They started working together.
kind of fell apart.
They had the DCED study done. Everybody was ready to go. It then fell apart. And so now they're back at it again.
And there was critical need within those 4 municipalities at the time where.
Well, okay. So 5 years ago, I mean, we're talking those departments had 10, 12 officers. Now they have 3.
And East Pittsburgh doesn't have a police force,
So the state police are patrolling a lot of those communities in the evening. So they're in a bad spot. Yes.
So we already do some contracted services with Braddock Hills.
That is correct.
So I'm kind of wondering how that's going. Do you see that being expanded? And are you looking for more things like that? Or are you looking for more on the consolidated side?
I think this is a general conversation to see if the community is willing to have council have these discussions and see who's interested. Because the reality is manpower is driving this all over the country. And lack of it is driving it in the communities next to us. So I think we're just trying to face some harsh realities that are coming. There's just no getting away from it.
I'm just curious, like your personal opinion, like, do you think contracted is better, consolidated is better? Do you have an opinion?
Honestly, I don't have a personal. I believe that it's up to the community members and the elected officials to direct us what they want us to do. I'm here to provide you with the information as I know it. I have been through these conversations starting 12 years ago. We did a whole thing with a neighboring community, then a presentation, and I actually did it. I sat on a board at the Allegheny League of Municipalities back then and talked about these issues with the chief of Northern Regional at the time. So I have no position here other than to give you information as I know. Yes.
I'm wondering if you could speak to the current police budget and how that is being reflected in the personnel who are present in it, and if there's like extra funds because that isn't being utilized by like the
Part-time officer.
Yeah.
So our current police, we're well funded. Council over the years has made public safety a priority in this community. And I'm going to the Department of Public Works. The streets are obviously very well taken care of here, especially when we have a federal. So it's not a budgetary issue per se. It's finding people to fill those roles. So what's happening now is we end up paying overtime more than we probably should. The officers end up working more hours, and then you talk about productivity being an issue. And, it's a safety thing too. You want an officer to be well rested, you want to be in a good frame of mind, provide professional service. It's hard when you're working 16-hour shifts because we have a lack of people.
Yeah, I guess my curiosity is also in relation to the program that was discussed previously in relation to sort of upstream prevention of a need for officers to be like doing low-level crime or things like that, because services are provided that kind of meet folks prior to even needing to interact at that level, and what like funds could be utilized towards those type of programs.
So the LEAD program is provided by a grant, which is a great thing. And yes, that will help, but that's not an everyday thing. Okay. And that's why we have the cohort, because that need isn't enough that each of us will fill up the use of that service. Does that make sense? Like, we don't have 40 hours a week of need for a social worker. We may have 5 or 10, and then the community next door may have 5. So sharing that is a very efficient way budgetarily to do it, because none of us have the need for that person all the time.
For that specific program.
For that specific program.
But if there are other services that can kind of prevent for even individuals from having to interact on that level with the services, is that something that could have budget?
Again, most of our calls are where the police need to be. It's just taking these few things that we have that are repetitive and trying to give them the help. There are times we deal with people who don't need law enforcement. They need house, food, medical care, mental health care, and that's to get those people these services.
So, and just kind of speaking to that a little bit, most budgets in any organization are, not any, but many organizations is based on staffing. And there is a contract that the police have that dictates a minimum staffing requirement. And so in a lot of ways, it would be very difficult to cut into that for some of these other categories, like what we're talking about, other roles, because it would not allow us to make, to have the budget money to staff up to what the contract is for like the minimum staffing. But that's one of the advantages, I think, of regionalization is, we're a 1.25 square mile borough. And if we're connected to some of these others, right, has a saying go, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I've spoken to Chief about this, that I would love to see if we were able to do something like this, the opportunity to use funds that were for repeat in multiple communities for things like a full-time social worker that's shared among, in that service.
I mean, like, one of the things I'm beginning to think in a regional, and we've had these conversations with the district attorney, is like a crime analyst. Like, I could tell you today, I spent time downloading video from body cameras for court, because I don't have anybody else to do it. So is that an efficient use of my time? No, but it has to be done. So, I mean, that's like, whether it's a crime analyst who can do those kind of tasks, whether it's a social worker, which we're going to have. We're the second cohort in Allegheny County to do that. And that's a great, it would not exist without an organization like that. So, I mean, do we have or do we to the point we need a full-time social worker in Swissvale? No, I don't. I will tell you from my experience, we don't. Do we need it every week at some point? Yeah, probably. A couple hours a week to 10 hours a week. Yeah, we can direct the people who need that service to them and hopefully not have to deal with them, because they're not committing crimes because they want to commit crimes. They're hungry, they're cold. They just, they need care for. So we're trying to do that for those things.
Can I finish just the comment that I was trying to finish making is Hampton Township, I think, is a good example. They presented it at the ALOM conference, Allegheny League of Municipalities, last year. And they had a pilot program through Slippery Rock that they have funded for a full-time social worker that is able to do some of these, as Ms. Kelly said at the beginning of her presentation. Police officers are being called to a number of things that are kind of outside of the jurisdiction of what they should be responsible for. And so having those types of resources are helpful. A borough like ours can't afford it. Hampton might be able to afford it, but we can't. So that gets back to that regionalization might free up the funds to be able to do something like that.
And I think you're working on another program that's co-responder.
Yeah, Allegheny County Department of Human Services is also working on co-response and crisis response. So all this work is going on with different municipalities.
But the point of that is going on a regional basis, because none of us can do it by ourselves. And, President Ansel makes a good point of that. I mean, it's just, the budget isn't there for that, but we can, through these organizations, provide that service. Yes, sir.
Chief Watson, I'm so glad to hear all these facts and everything, and if you could comment on it, if you're comfortable with it, if you're allowed to. Thank God, before we finalize our Berg building, might we end up kind of like being the capital, if you will, like the headquarters of a merged department? Are we gonna have enough space and technology? Can we add on to the building? Will we be just right? Will we be Goldilocks and be just right?
I can't answer those questions because I don't know where this is going to lead. I will say that the new municipal building is built to house our department as it currently is structured, and there is room for some expansion. So.
And also just as a point, in a theoretical situation where you're combining municipalities, you have resources in both municipalities.
Right.
So instead of just having a single hub for your police station, you may have a building that was present in the other municipality that can now be a hub for that part of the municipality or for other apparatus or whatever it may be.
Yes.
It's all, sorry. I was just going to say, it's all coming back to this pooling of resources and being able to come together as municipalities, because the reality is I've only been on council for just over a year, but what I've heard through my newly elected course and hearing from multiple people is the current model in our county is not sustainable, not just for police, but for fire, for public works, whatever it may be. Our current model of every individual municipality being autonomous and saying we are who we are and we want our own things, it's not going to be able to work long term. Now, there's multiple solutions of how we can address that, but as a community, we have to start to prepare that something is going to have to change because it's not sustainable long term.
I mean, other parts of the country started doing this 20 years ago, 30 years ago. If you look at Charlotte, Mecklenburg, or there's a Nashville. I mean, there's a list of them that have gone through this. So we're kind of like, I always say Pittsburgh's 20 years behind on things. So, seems to be about true.
I would obviously say, Chief, like this shooter prevention training, that's probably very advanced. Could you say versus when you started to now, are we kind of like a little bit based off the 1950s, 1970s?
No, I mean, I will say that, through the years of councils, the managers have all committed to providing us with the best technology available. I mean, I would say our equipment rivals anybody in this county. So our officers are trained. I mean, we can always do more training. I believe there's never enough, but I think that your elected officials, the people who represent this community, have made public safety, whether it's the fire department, the public works, they've invested in those departments to provide you with the best service they can for the amount of money that's available. And if you look at your taxes, I think for what you get, you're getting good bang for your buck in this community. Yes.
Chief Watson, in your opinion, what would make this career more attractive?
I think full time. I think, the thing is, part-time policing came out of the collapse of the steel industry. You had a lot of people who lost their jobs who were looking for work, and they signed up to be police officers. And when there was no place to work and you only available was a job part-time, they took it. And it became this model where you might have a couple full-time officers and then you supplement with all this part-time with, like I was a young person looking for a job and I took what I could get because there weren't a lot of police jobs. I mean, I was out taking tests. I took Wilkinsburg's test with 125 people back in 1997. So, I mean, now they get 3. So, I mean, I don't know how else to highlight the critical need for people. And that, I'm 4 years from being able to retire. Okay. About a third of your police departments within 7 years of retiring. Wilkinsburg's going to lose 25% of their department in the next 2 years. There is going to be a lack of people soon.
How do we change that?
I think that regionalization, combining the services, making it more efficient, getting rid of part-time. Hiring full-time officers will help stem this problem until it changes. Things go up and down. Right now, we're at a low point. When I started in police work, there were more, there's probably 10 police officers for every job. So
And IUP has a police training academy.
I went there.
Did you really?
Yes, I did.
And so they, even at the academic level, they're thinking about new ways to bring in more people and train them into the field. And so they have these placements that they're doing now with people who are in the program, so that and the municipalities are getting value out of that. They're getting funding to keep them in there. It's more like a mentor-mentee role. So even the training academies are trying to be really creative with how they recruit people into their programs.
I mean, again, I think the number was at one point there were 300,000 volunteer firemen. And now there's like 30,000. Is that right, Clyde?
They said, yeah, 1980 was 300,000, in 2018, 38,000. But that's come to realize that those numbers were inflated by about 10 because you have people that are in multiple departments. Like someone who works here and then volunteers somewhere else, or works here in another department and then volunteers at home. Well, they got counted 2 or 3 times. We're really down to about 22,000. And we're in crisis. We are in major crisis ourselves. I just was invited on WTE Sunday morning. I was on a show talking about that very thing. And we don't know what the answer is. We don't know what's going on. We pull from volunteers to hire here because we hire trained people that are already trained. Well, that pool is shrunk. There's virtually nobody left to hire that wants to even work anymore. We don't understand it. Part of the Western Pennsylvania Career Fire Chiefs group, we meet quarterly and we discuss this. It's all from Erie to Washington, PA, to Johnstown, career departments and combination departments. We don't have any candidates applying. We don't know what to do.
I mean, I joined the fire department when I was 14 years old. I'm still a member. I've been there 36 years. It used to be there was firemen everywhere. They're just a part. Further Clyde's point, I have personal experience. I worked in EMS prior to the the EMS agencies are struggling probably worse than anybody else. They can't find people to be EMTs and paramedics. So there's just some harsh realities we're all going to have to face, and public safety has to be. It's just so important that the people are there to answer those calls. So we want people to be there to answer. So,
and just one other point, I think having this conversation early before there's a formal offer or something that's on the table gives us some control, not only as the department and the council, but trying to engage the community for us to drive the narrative of what that looks like here in Swissvale. And I think, I just, as a member of council, want to reiterate how important the feedback from the community is in this, because it is, as we know, there's only one regionalized department here in Allegheny County. It's a new thing in this area. And so we are going to have to be strategic and smart about how we go about this. And we're going to need that input and that, direction if that is.
Well, I mean, and one of the things people need to understand is if you lose your police department, or, if you have a police department that provided 24-hour service and doesn't anymore, the answer is the state police. And I will tell you that there might be 5 troopers working at night turn in the whole county. And if you call the state police, or you call your police and the state police are answering it, you may see them in an hour.
Are they coming out of Moon?
Yes. I mean, they're usually on the road, but who knows where they are.
I was in an accident on the Parkway about 4 years ago, and we waited an hour and a half for state police to respond. So, I mean, it's not something you want. I mean, sit there on the side of the road for an hour and a half, or God forbid someone's doing something terrible at your residence. So.
This is the discussion. So I'd like to direct to Michelle. This seems to be a county solution. I mean,
Right. Okay, so
That's why that's why DCED has this program established for both fire and police. And they've got a funding pool, they've got technical assistance to be able to help the municipalities, because unfortunately.
the county police got into local policing in Wilmington for 5 years and they got out. So, Pitcairn is now patrolling Wilmington. So
I was thinking more on the fact that it would be the overlay. the county police would be, instead of the state police coming in, the
Well,
county would be able to.
legally, the state police have that responsibility. So the county police are not gonna take that on when the law dictates.
Probably a legislative
Yes.
action. that we
Yeah,
have.
that's from our ears.
Okay.
Yes.
I know this is about policing, but I just want to throw this one thing out, in 30 seconds, if you would. You're going to see the same topic coming up in fire departments in the very near future. All right, is Woodland Hills is an example. 15 years ago, we had 17 fire companies. We're down to 11 because 6 went up, just are gone. And we don't have the resources here in our region to provide the necessary fire protection that we should be doing. A big problem is financing and funding of it. A lot of communities don't want to have to pay for that stuff. And they've gotten away with it for a long time. And it's going to come to the point where they're going to have to. And regionalization, whether it be county or whatever, is definitely the way to go. I've been involved in this on a state, national level. In any way to make this larger than a few departments, whether police or fire on a smaller scale, is going to require legislation in Harrisburg to change the abilities for us to do these things. Because the only way you can do it now for policing is either contract, like you said, or form an authority. But all the laws that were created to protect police officers and firefighters, like from injuries and keep them from going on strike and all those other things, they don't apply to authorities. So all the protections, you can have police, fired for political reasons or whatever else. All those civil service protections, heart and lung protections, all of the other things, when you get into authority-based, they don't have any of those protections. And they fought 200 years for those things. So it's a bigger problem than just coming together and saying, let's do this. There's a lot of wheels that need to move.
We have a meeting on Wednesday at Connect. Future of Fire needs assessment. We have a big
Council meeting.
organization. It is at 12:30.
Oh, in the afternoon?
Yeah.
Let me check.
Give me your email before you leave.
Yes.
So, like, I think, we were talking about kind of the idea of like, well, what do residents think about moving forward and things like that. And I think like I have a lot of really specific questions that it sounds like we're probably not prepared to answer per se, or like even necessarily voice an opinion on as far as things like, will there be residency requirements and, questions like that.
Yeah, those
really
are things
specific.
way in the weeds.
Right.
that are
So,
down the road.
right, exactly. So, I mean, I think it's somewhat hard to like form an opinion without kind of knowing what direction
Well, I think,
folks want to go in.
I think
but-
it's real, this is what, I'm gonna answer this question to the best of my knowledge, and if council disagrees with me, I think are the residents willing to give council the opportunity to reach out to other communities and see if they're interested? That's it. If they're interested, the next step would be to sign some agreements and do the DCED study, which would lay out a plan that would answer a lot of those questions that are specific to that. So, and then even if that happens, nobody's obligated to anything other than we saw what's available.
Right.
So.
That makes sense.
Okay.
I feel like that makes sense.
Does that answer-
That makes the context of this meeting make a little bit more
Okay.
sense, for sure.
Good.
So yeah, so kind of backing up then sort of the type of questions and not be that specific. I guess I'm just curious in your mind, what your definition of success would look like in terms of regionalization. It sounds to me, if you can allow me to like reflect what I'm hearing for a second and make sure I'm accurate in that it sounds to me like your definition of success is a full-time police force. I'm curious if that means an overall increase in number of police force on patrol at any given time, or if it's just purely like we just want a full-time police force in order to be able to attract the people and keep a certain number of people, contractually that we need to have on staff.
So the national average for police officers is 2.4 per thousand. So a community like Swissvale, 9,000 people, you're talking about 22 officers. We don't have it. Okay. So I don't know if we'll ever get there because of financial. So, if you add another community, that asks a lot more questions. But my goal would be to have a well-trained, full-time professional police department that's able to answer the calls themselves and provide good service to the community for the money that's available. So I don't know how to answer that question other than that.
No, that's great.
Yes.
So, I guess trying to get this straight in my head, this isn't necessarily a question to you so much as just, so when I hear regionalization, I assume that this was a financial thing. And it really sounds like the drive here is we will have better police, maybe even better fire if we head down this regionalization, and a far better chance of attracting better police officers if we do this. This is more a quality than a cost savings thing. And I guess in which case this sounds good to me, but I like the idea of the regionalization and not, this is the feedback for council. I like the idea of regionalization. Anything where you start talking about pushing it to county, like, yeah, that sounds too far away. But regionalization?
I mean, you don't, the community does not lose its say.
Right.
And that, I know that's important. I get that. We all get that. That's important. So I think your summarization of what you said is right on point with me.
Yeah, this is about manpower. This is about finding people to work, finding police officers that are going into the field. And when people come out of the police academy today, they have a full-time job offer in 2 or 3 weeks. We've had several part-time police officers come here. They start training. Oh, sorry, I got a job in Penn Hills. Sorry, I got a job in Palm. Sorry, I got a job in Murraysville. And they're gone as soon as they get here. So it's about providing quality police services within our resources, within our needs, but this is manpower is driving this, not finance.
One of my new jobs is I'm a recruiter. So now I go to police academies, I do interviews for compositions, and I see the people who probably aren't going to get them because they didn't test high enough, and I start recruiting. And the other chiefs I'm with kind of laugh because they're from bigger agencies and they have this problem and not at the level we do. But that's just the way it is now. And there was 2 officers who applied for part-time. And I knew they were on the list for Penn Hills, and I called the chief and said, "Hey, are you hiring both of these guys?" He said, "Yeah, I'm hiring them next week, full time." I said, "Okay, good enough." It's just the way it is. I hope it changes, but it's not going to change in the near future.
I'm sorry.
I have a question. Has COVID played into this mess?
I don't know, but somehow I think COVID played into a lot of the mess. So. I don't know how else to answer that, but yeah, I think
it may have.
It may have. I don't know in this specific instance because this has been coming for.
Yeah, it's been coming, but
10 years.
COVID may have inflated a little
That's
bit more.
possible. Yeah. So, anything else? Yes, sir.
This is, I think, more of a request than a question, and I think for Borough Council in particular. I hope you keep having these, that this is not just the start and you get to say, oh, great, we engaged the community and now we're going to keep going forward with this and not keep talking to the community. I would expect to continue having these at every step of the way. Something that I would find really useful at some point is some case studies of, I know we only have 1 in the county, it sounds like, that's regionalized. I'd love to see case studies of other parts of the country that have done this, what's worked, what hasn't, so we can take an objective view of that as we're starting to make decisions as the DCED study comes in, et cetera, et cetera. I would love to have it might even make sense to do some outreach just at the beginning of this meeting. I asked for a regionalization 101. I asked for that because I imagine there might be people watching, people in my neighborhood. They hear me say regionalization, and I want to be able to explain to them, bottom line, what does that mean? And so I think we need a fact sheet, probably some social media. We need some explainers, whatever we can do to have people understand at the base level, what is this in the 5 minutes they have in their day or less, so that the people who can't be in this room can start weighing in on things like this. This was not actually that wonky of a meeting, but it was actually a pretty wonky meeting. And by wonky, I mean, we're using vocabulary and using details that are it takes some understanding, having been in rooms like this before, to understand it. Frankly, that's not most of Swissvale. And so we have a long way to go to educate the population and educate the public about what does this mean actually? So I hope we see more of that is my request, and more opportunities.
And actually what I was gonna say is, I know there were probably some thoughts when people saw Swissvale Police Regionalization meeting, they thought they would come here and hear like, here's a proposal,
Yeah,
here's
that's
what
right.
may happen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there was kind of like, what is this now?
And I'm grateful that you engaged
Yeah,
as well.
and so, and what I was gonna say, exactly your point is, the goal is not for this to be well, we pitched it to the public, let's go back behind our closed doors and make a deal. It would be, the next step would be if a deal or something would come to be, we then bring that back to the public and say, okay, now here's a proposal. Now let's get in, like Miranda said, some of these more in the weeds questions about like, let's go into this in more detail. And to your point, Seth, since I've been on council, one of the things I've struggled the most with is how we can communicate to our residents effectively. It's great that we have this meeting here and we have 30 people or so, but in a borough of 9,000, this is a drop in the bucket. And we encounter that issue with a lot of things, whether it's informing people about meetings, informing people about, there goes our fire. Informing people about meetings or informing people about the newsletter changing. It is hard. It's very difficult to engage with a large amount of our residents to get the word out about these things. And so we do have to rely on those people that we have in the different neighborhoods around the community to then go from these meetings and to spread that information. And we have groups like SDAC that do a great job of getting information out, but we can continue to work on that. And I think we do as a council, as a borough, need to continue to work on honing our communication.
I
So,
can help you with that too.
yeah.
So and Sean, your council
Oh, and
member,
yeah.
Sean with Connect, she is the vice president of our board at Connect. And so we actually have a comms and tech subcommittee that's meeting to talk about this very issue. Like, how do we get these things out to community members? And especially dealing with, you all have really great technology here. We have municipalities in Allegheny County that don't have any of this. They don't have Zooms. They don't know how to do that. They don't do anything on social media. They don't have any kind of ways to communicate with their residents other than a borough meeting once a month. So they don't even have files uploaded electronically to share with their community members. So we're working on all those issues. We're also working on having like a local government one-on-one, where we come out to different communities and talk about what your local government does. Who do you contact when you have this sort of problem? Who's the right person to go to? Sometimes it isn't your council. Sometimes it's somebody else that you need to talk to. So we're working on all those. So please just, we have a lot of these things coming up. And as a member community, you have access to all of that. So.
And as well, Deanne said, our contact information's on the website, and sometimes I get lonely, please, like, honestly, I say that jokingly, but honestly, no. And I say that jokingly, but honestly, like, sometimes when we don't hear things, we don't know, that there's a gap out there in communication.
We open up comments on your YouTube.
But yes, so there is we do want to be accessible in that way.
All right, so I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Once again, in this cold weather and this weekday, I hope that what the goal and the purpose was is just to start a discussion. We didn't want to go into any sort of agreements or backhand deals without first consulting with our community. And so from some of the questions that have come out tonight, it sounds like that goal was achieved because it is a basic fundamental discussion. And the goal is, especially if it relates to the police, and as long as I'm the chair of the police committee, we're going to continue to have these discussions. So thank you again. And virtually, my contact information is on the website. I know you guys hit me up because I get your emails. Hit me up about this if you have some more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.